Mall. And she will be talking about how she creates sacred space with her work. She does a lot of other interesting things as well. So it should be a fascinating discussion. And then we have a very special program coming up with someone who many of us all know and love, Ramberto Rodriguez, who recently retired as Silver Spring Regional Center Director, is now teaching a course at UMD in architecture, which is actually his field of study. He's going to be doing a preview of that. And the program is called Havana's Art and Culture, the intersection of architecture, planning, preservation, economics, with Ramberto Rodriguez this Thursday, 7 to 9 p.m. So I hope you can join us for that. All of our events are made possible with generous support from Montgomery County, United Therapeutics, the Arts and Humanities of Montgomery County, Maryland State Arts, and many others. And now let's get started with the program, Follow Your Bliss. I just lost Lorna's bio, but I'll just tell you, Lorna's an extraordinary communications professional. She has Cuban roots and grew up in Miami, and just wrote her first book about her father, Blanca.
Sinfonia Blanca.
Sinfonia Blanca, I'm blanking right now. Sinfonia Blanca. And I have read a little bit of it in Spanish, but I read much more slowly in Spanish, but it's great practice for me. And I know a lot of people are waiting for the English version. Are you doing an English version?
Absolutely, that's coming up very soon. It's really interesting that you mentioned that, Lisa. Well, thank you first and foremost for having us this evening. I am truly delighted to be sharing this space, even though it's virtual, with these 6 amazing participants. We're going to read a little bit of their bios, and we're definitely going to hear from them. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, you at home, and also the speakers that will be joining us today. Yes, my book, Sinfonia Blanca, White Symphony, will be available in English language coming up soon. Website, Lorna Virgili, if you can roll your R's, lornavirgili.com. But it is in the process right now of transcreation, because it's not a translation. You got to transcreate to another language. And it's taking me a little longer than I thought, because I do have another job, a day job, where I do government public relations. And that takes time too. But follow your bliss. How many times many of us have pondered, gee, what would I do if I had all the money in the world? I didn't need to worry about finances. So what would I do? What would be my talent, my gift? And the one thing that I would enjoy doing the most? For me, I was a little girl growing up in Havana. I actually was born and raised there during the height of the Cold War. And in school, I was a writer. I was one of those students that would always excel in writing. And I always wanted to be a writer. Now, you immigrate, you get out of Cuba, you come to the United States, you get to learn another language, you go to school, you start producing, you become a mother, and life happens. And that talent was set aside for a long time, even though I did do communications. I've been a national Spanish language broadcast journalist for over 30 years. So in a way, writing continued for television and radio, for news and information. Creative writing, just stayed back there in the back burner. So it was interesting, back in 2018, a couple of years ago, I have an old she shed in the back of my house, and that thing was abandoned. It was horrible, full of stuff. And summer of 2018, actually 2019, I said to myself, I'm going to clean this up, and I'm going to make this a she shed, and I'm going to write a book on this in this place. So of course, the first thing I needed to do was get rid of a huge squirrel nest, and then clean it up, paint it. And I got old antique furniture, refurbished it, and made the space truly beautiful. I was going to write a book there. I really didn't know what the book was going to be about, but I knew I was going to write a book. I remember it came the holiday season 2019, and my son gave me a brand new laptop with a wonderful keyboard, gamers can hear it, keyboard. And I was ready to write the book, but nothing came. Nothing came in my mind, my heart, and my soul. I went every morning to drink my coffee there, and I just prayed to the heavens for emotion so that everything would come upon me so I could write a book. That was 2019. 2020 came around, and my father passed away during the COVID pandemic. Oh boy, did the emotions came rolling. But not only that, what do you do when your father leaves behind a box full of women in the nude? Not porno, guys, but women in the nude in a very artistic way. My father was a painter, very accomplished artist, and he dedicated himself to painting the female figure. He also left behind an unfinished manuscript and his diaries. So part of the morning after his death, I retire myself to my she shed, just a few meters from this space where I'm at right now in my home. And I read his manuscript, I read his diaries, and I finished his book, which is this one, Sinfonia Blanca, right here. This, it's actually a partial photograph of painting number 1 of the White Symphony collection that my father left to my sister and I. So that's kind of a little bit of how I found my bliss in a moment of pain and sorrow, but it was a way to honor him and also a way for me to circle back and find my talent and my bliss. Needless to say that it will be in English and that I already have the other book on my mind that is going to be happening very soon. So anyways, that's kind of the story. And now I want to move to you guys. Is that good, Lisa? Did I take too much time? So if you allow me, I'd like to introduce the panelists today, the participants, the speakers today. I've been reading their bios, and I'm going to read a little bit to all of you so that you get to know them. And of course, they're going to tell us their own story. First, I'd like to introduce Bola Audena. Bola is the CEO and managing partner of MBA Growth Partners, which is a business advisory and management consultancy providing full service operational support to small to mid-sized businesses with a specific focus on women and minority managed organizations. Bola spent over 15 years working in the corporate sector. Many Black-owned businesses employ less than 5 people, and that's largely because they're not taking advantage of the systems and organizational efficiencies needed to scale at faster rates. That was when she realized her time, talent, and energy is best spent working to support businesses within our community. She will tell us, of course, much more about it. And welcome, Bola. Good to see you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
I'd like to introduce Jason Gedeik. Jason, to me, is very special because I see him very often, and you'll find out how. He was a marketing and nonprofit advocacy in that field for over 15 years before he realized that his life's passion for horticulture and education. After returning to college in his late 30s, never is too late, for plant sciences, Jason entered the world of public horticulture as the orchid curator and later the head of design at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. He is currently the adult education manager at Brookside Gardens, where he teaches and curates lecture series, workshops, garden tours, and festivals. It is so great to see him here tonight because I see him often while I run at Brookside Gardens. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next up is Phillippa Hughes. She is a social sculptor and creative strategist who produces art-fueled projects that spark humanizing and compassionate conversations between people who might not normally meet. She has designed and produced hundreds of creative activations since 2007 for curious people to engage with art and with one another in unconventional and essential ways. She leads Curiosity Connects Us, and she recently returned from a 3 months writing sabbatical in Paris. I already want to meet you, Phillippa. Good evening. So good to see you. All right, up next is Kim Levone, who is the founder and producer of Improbable Comedy. This is a comedy production group based in Silver Spring. When Kim was deep into her social work career and busy with her 4 kids, wow, 4, she had a bug to put on a show. She produced a comedy show called Improbable Comedy. That first show at Vecinos in Silver Spring was a total success, and the name just stuck. Improbable, God, is a hard word for me to pronounce, comedy, has produced over 150 shows, mostly in the DC area, but also in Brazil, where Levone lived for several years. The focus is on bringing people out for high quality shows and also highlighting funny performers with an emphasis on booking more women comedians, immigrant comics, as well as performers with disabilities. Can't wait to hear all about it, Kim. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Neha Misra is a contemporary visual folk artist, poet, and an award-winning global climate justice advocate. Neha, which means love, has roots in Sanskrit, the ancient language of her ancestors. Neha grew up in the heart of India's capital, New Delhi, whose soulful vibrancy is a part of her creative DNA. America is her adopted home, where she embodies powerful, creative reclamations of imagination as a living prayer for private, collective, and planetary healing. Neha's Earth Stewardship Center multidisciplinary practice is rooted in the eco-folk art and sacred geometry traditions of India, combined with her lifelong environmental justice work and foundational education in physics. I want to hear all about your studio, Neha. Good evening.
Thank you so much.
All right, and lastly, but not least, Joel Teitelbaum was born in Missouri in 1940 as the first of 4 children to a father with the US Army and a mother who was a social worker. His childhood was punctuated by a succession of family moves. Changing places and cultures became a key pattern of Joel's way of life. He graduated from Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring in the 1950s, while his father was at the Pentagon and mother with DC visiting nurses. After undergraduate years at Brown University, Joel chose to study anthropology in England. His doctoral fieldwork took him to North Africa, Tunisia, to investigate rural village families. Joel's life changed dramatically after he married Maya, a horticulturalist from an alpine village in Switzerland. With 2 small children in tow, they moved to Morocco and Tunisia for Joel's research fellowship, then to the University of North Carolina, where Joel did a master's degree in public health. Back to Morocco for Joel's rural health planning work in the Atlas Mountains. Well, now he is retired and lives in Silver, and I believe he's a Silver Spring resident, but has traveled around the world to multiple countries. Welcome, Joel. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so these are 6 amazing panelists today. And are we ready, Lisa, to get started, to hear from them?
Yes, let's get going. I'm so eager to hear from everyone. Such an interesting lineup we've got here tonight.
I know. So many different fields and nationalities. So we're going to do this alphabetically. And I believe, Bola, you're the first one to go. Good evening. Tell us all about Your Bliss.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Great to see everyone.
Your audio, it's a little off. Can you check and see if you can get a little louder?
Sure. Is it better?
That's better?
Okay, so let me scoot closer. All right. Bola, Audena, thanks so much for having me here. And, you know, I decided to follow my bliss probably about 3 years ago after we spent a year of trying to buy Black. This is sort of a thing that came to my attention in that, you know, before the small business sort of revolution that's taking place came upon us, there was just this concept of trying to buy from Black vendors and business owners to sustain your livelihood for a year. It was a challenge that I read about, and I decided to take it on because I've always been in consulting, and what that means is I help organizations, Fortune 500 government agencies, sort of just think about how to align their mission and strategy to their day-to-day operations. So when the concept of buying Black came about, we decided to take on the challenge, and we realized that number one, the dollar circulates probably about 20 seconds within the Black community, meaning, you know, folks generally don't patronize Black vendors and what have you. So we wanted to support the growth of Black businesses by buying Black for a year, and we realized how challenging it was, you know, just the day-to-day sort of material services that we needed was very difficult to find. Buying gas was really difficult. You have to go out of your way to do that. Groceries, produce. And we realized, you know, maybe a few months into it, that it's not that Black businesses or even women-owned businesses are not plentiful, they're just not scaling. They don't have the capital, they don't have the mentors, they don't have the systems, just a lot of things that our counterparts take for granted. And in the space that I've worked within, which is large businesses and government agencies, you know, these are best practices that are known, but they don't always trickle down to Black and women-owned businesses. So after a really long year, I realized that, you know, my own personal talent and expertise was probably best spent supporting Black and women managed organizations. So what that means is coming on to support, you know, Black-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, to help them think about how they might scale, you know, what systems could be put in place, what best practices could be put in place, but ultimately, how could we partner with them with what we know so that, you know, the lonely journey of being a CEO, an executive director, a one-off, you know, solopreneur, you know, could be supported by us and, you know, my team of folks to really help them execute and put those systems in place. So that started about 3 years ago, and you know, we've worked with some amazing businesses, but this really, when you think about finding your bliss, this is a space that I'm passionate about, just helping people realize not only their dreams, but also scale it beyond one generation to the next. So happy to talk about that in greater detail, but it's been a great passion and honor of mine, and I really consider it to be my life's mission. So thank you. Oh, I think you're on mute.
I need to unmute myself. Okay. Thank you, Bola, for that introduction of yourself. It's really, really exciting. And I think we're going to have questions here. And I keep saying that I need to unmute myself. Okay. Next up is Jason. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I'm Jason Gedeik, and it's wonderful to be here on this panel with everyone. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to share my story. And Bola, I really appreciate your story and the work that you're doing to uplift your community. I think that's really important. So where to begin? I remember when Lisa sent this invite, said, would you like to be on a panel about following your bliss? For me, those words and that line is the core of what brought me to work in my field. And I was at a very low point. And I guess my origin story of following my bliss was going through a series of disappointments career-wise, and hitting a lot of walls, and asking God, asking the universe, why? I'm working hard, I'm trying hard. Why do I keep getting slapped down in many different ways? And then someone recommended the book to me by Joseph Campbell, which is Pathways to Bliss, which is all about following your bliss. And that man is an amazing, wise person. And there's this quote I want to share. It says, follow your bliss and the universe will open doors where there were only walls. And for me, that was the core of this change. And so I kind of hit a wall, as I said, and I was looking around my life saying, what can I do? I'm not happy in this current field. And I realized it was time to shift my thinking away from my head to my heart. And my heart for me was gardening in nature. I found God in nature. I found my spirituality in nature. I used to love hiking, and I still do. And so for me, I started allowing myself to dream and believe that I could make my love, my passion, a career, which is very scary at first for, I think, a lot of us. A lot of times we don't see where that could lead. And so I went back to school for plant sciences, and I underwent a lot of different internships with the Smithsonian, United States Botanic Garden, and just really embarked on a completely new journey, and had the wonderful support of my husband and family that had helped pioneer the way. My parents, my mother had changed careers as well. She was a hairdresser for 25 years and then went back to school and became a counselor and had her own clinic. So I think having those role models were certainly important, that it's never too late to change. And now I work at Brookside Gardens. And before that, as Lorna mentioned, I was at Hillwood Museum, which I loved dearly. It's a wonderful place for everyone to visit. But there I got exposure to education and realized that my passion not only was horticulture and gardening and nature, but sharing that in a way that inspired others. And so I started teaching courses there and classes, and that's where this light bulb went off in my heart and my soul. And I think, when you're following your bliss, there's this alignment, this connection to something greater than yourself, something more powerful. And truly, where there were walls, doors start to open. And so from there, I moved to Brookside Gardens at Montgomery Parks and have loved it ever since. And I'll just close that for me, that concept of following your bliss, it's an active verb. It's not an end destination. It's not an end goal. It is a journey. And I am still very excited about where that journey is going to lead me, because who knows how that bliss will manifest and evolve over time. So I encourage everyone out there, if you feel stuck or in a low point, you are definitely not alone, and do some inventory of yourself, and hopefully you'll too find a way to follow your bliss. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing that story with us. I'm sure we're going to talk about those walls that often we find and obstacles, because I'm sure we've all experimented that. And some people out there might be precisely hitting a wall right now with everything that is happening around us. And it's time to encourage others to think that, yeah, your bliss is just around the corner behind that wall. Thank you for sharing that. You're up now, Phillippa. Share with us some of your bliss.
Thank you. I have a long series of bliss moments, so I'll go back. So I went to law school. I was trained as a lawyer early in my life. I have an Asian mother who said I could be a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. And so I picked being a lawyer because that seemed like the easiest thing to do. And I really loved going to law school, but I really hated practicing law. And so I struggled through that for, I think, I'd say 6 years. And during that time, I started, kind of like you, Lorna, I started to remember that like my first true love is writing. And so, and my second true love is just sort of art in general. And so while I was sort of struggling as a lawyer and really just not, it just really was not a good fit for me, I started to write a blog about art stuff that I was doing around DC. And, you know, this was back in like the early 2000s. So I feel like I was kind of on the cutting edge of like blog writing at that point. And I would just write things that I saw that I liked in the art world, and then I started writing, you know, because people were asking me like, what, you know, where are you going this weekend? So I started writing a weekly post in which I would tell people where I was going the coming weekend and what I was interested in. And then I started organizing these little salons in my house, just inviting artists over to my house just because I wanted to be around artists and drink wine with them. And, you know, I mean, long story short is that blog turned into, you know, this sort of website that thousands of people started following called Pink Line Project. And those salons started turning into like these, you know, events of all kinds of sizes outside of my home, including a couple of major events outside in warehouses, raw spaces around DC that like 2,000 people would show up to, you know, in one night. And so all of that is to say is that, you know, it's really hard for me to say, here are the steps to, like, I didn't, you know, here are the steps to following your bliss. Like, I just kind of started doing things that I like to do. And it turned out that a lot of other people like to do them too. So I never had like sort of a plan, maybe a little bit like you too, Lorna, like it just, this little accident happened. And I just started doing the things that felt right for me. And it turned out that it kind of worked out. I will say though, that, you know, because I had been a lawyer for, you know, a few years, I did have pretty decent like financial security to make that transition from being a lawyer to, you know, art world and writing. You know, people often ask me like, how did you make that? How did that happen? And I always want to like remind people that, you know, if you don't have like, and also I should mention that I had a very supportive spouse at the time, who was very, you know, not only emotionally supportive, but financially supportive. Like, if you don't have a year's worth of income saved up, or if you don't have somebody to help support you financially, I'd be very careful about making those kind of leaps. And at the same time, while you're like saving up the money to, you know, make a full transition, while you're figuring it all out, do small steps along the way and take the tiny steps. Like I was saying, I started writing a blog. I started just little small salons in my home. And so I think that's really sort of the message I want to leave on another point, but like on that point, just taking tiny steps based on what you like, and then just letting that evolve and keep evolving and keep asking, you know, what is the next thing? And that's sort of what happened. I mean, that first big event the first two big events that I organized around art and culture and activation of raw space was in 2007. And then, you know, since then, that evolved into doing events in museum spaces like the Hirshhorn, the Phillips Collection. I started doing major projects with the DC Office of Planning, where we would do creative placemaking projects around the city. And then that evolved into a national project that I've been working on most recently called Looking for America, where I have been traveling around the country, organizing art experiences for people as far away as Anchorage, Alaska, and El Paso, Texas, and asking people, what does it mean to be American? And then having conversations across the political spectrum to talk about, like, you know, find our common ground in terms of what it means to be American. So that's what I've been working on most recently. And, you know, each thing, you know, if you looked at the first thing and the last thing, you might not see a lot of connection, but if you look at all the little steps in between, you start seeing like, oh, it just makes sense. Like this led to this, that led to this other thing. I met this one person who like turned me on to this other thing. So it's just a series of small steps that happened that led me to getting, you know, a pretty sizable grant to travel around the country. So, and each step was driven by like, what is my dream and what do I want to do? Now, I should go circle back around to, I said earlier that, like Lorna, I loved writing. And so I have to admit that, I would do some writing in between all of that, but I wasn't doing a lot of consistent writing. And so recently I did spend 3 months in Paris only writing. Like my goal going there was to write, because I was sort of like mad at myself that I had not kept that practice up. And so I do think that, I know that I was very lucky and had a lot of privilege to be able to even take 3 months off from my world and go to France and just sit around and think and write. But that also was the result of a series of decisions and choices that were made that led to me even being able to do something like that. And so again, I just keep going back to making lots of small decisions that build on each other to lead to what your bliss is. It's not a magical experience that just suddenly appears one day.
I love, Phillippa, how you mentioned, the first love was writing, and then you found the second love, which was art, right? I want the rest of the panel to start thinking about your second or third or fourth love, because that made me think, gee, what is my second love now? And also, I want to take that sabbatical, but I want to go to Lisbon, Portugal. That's where I want to go. I've been saying it for the longest time. So you have just inspired me, Phillippa. All right, let's hear from Kim now. Good evening, Kim.
Good evening. First of all, this is such an interesting panel. I'm so enjoying listening to everybody. So I'm Kim Levone, and I produce Improbable Comedy. And I like to tell this little story about where I really got my thinking shifted. I was having, so my husband's family there are a lot of women in their family, and they have these women's get-togethers. I won't get into the details, but the point is, I was seated next to a woman who had worked in HGTV. So there was me, I was a social worker, I had 3 little kids. I just had my 3rd little kid. And she was, this something producer or personality at HGTV. We're sitting, we're talking, having a listening. Anyway, 45 minutes later, I'm like, oh, this is great to talk to you, so nice. She says, I have to tell you, Kim, sounds like you want to produce a comedy show. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. I seriously had no idea what a producer was. I do love comedy. I binge a lot of comedy, certainly when I was in college and in New York City. She said that, and I thought, she sees something and I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it out. And I mean, if I tell you, it was many years until I did my first show, but I still see that as a seminal point, a turning point, where someone saw in me something that I had not seen. And so I started talking to people. I started telling the story. I started saying, I don't even know how you put on a comedy show. And one friend said, well, you get a venue, you sell tickets, you get some comedians. I was like, oh, that's how you do it. And this was me. I started making lists. I started thinking about where we could do a show. Mostly there were not a lot of venues. And lo and behold, in 2012, so I want to say that was 7 years after that conversation, or maybe it was 5 years. Anyway, it was a long time after that conversation. I did my first show in the basement of Vicino's restaurant. We did 2 back-to-back shows, and we sold them out, 55 people each, and it was amazing. So, there were a lot of tricky, complicated parts. Of course, not everything was amazing, but the comedians were hilarious, and I definitely felt like, I booked a good show. Like that, I knew I did. And I did 1 show, we did 2 shows. We ended up doing 4 shows that year. If you plan events, you know that, like, if you never planned an event and then you do 4 in a year, it was like amazing. So very exciting. And then my husband got this opportunity to move to Brazil, which, to be honest, I didn't really want to do, because I was like, dude, our kids are finally going off to school and I'm doing this comedy thing and I got my social work thing going on. Very happy here in Silver Spring, but it was a great opportunity. And so we did do that, and I was not able to practice social work in Brazil. And I just said, I'm going to find any comedy that I can find. So I did spend those years in Brazil, talking to Brazilian comedians, which I spoke a little bit of Portuguese, of course, did not really understand any of the humor. But I will say, I did learn to sort of like, look at talent, not understanding, and still be able to see a performer on stage and say, oh yeah, that guy's got the room. I can see that, So there were all these things that over the years, I kind of was like, well, I'm just going to make the most of what I can in this moment. We did do shows there. We did shows in in Rio and Sao Paulo, and then the Olympics came to Brazil, and we did some shows in the run up to the Olympics. So all super exciting and interesting and challenging and a great learning experience, such that when I came back to Silver Spring in 2017 or 16, 17, I said, okay, I'm ready to do regular shows. And we started to do them 1 a month, and then 2 a month, and then a little more than 2 a month, and then 3 a month. I mean, I'll just say I still had my 4 kids and I still have my job as a social worker. So I pretty much don't do anything else. There's no TV in my life. I don't even socialize that much. Like pretty much I'm like, if you want to hang out with me, come to my show. So there's not a lot of extra time, but I consider my serious side hustle now doing the shows. And in the beginning, it was all about just bringing people out, look for live performance, like get away from Netflix, come see other people, be in a room together, experience this one-time event. But now that I've done it for a while, I've become very passionate about putting representation on stage that reflects the representation in the community. And the more I do it, the more, the more you do it, the more you see it. And I'm sure that Bola, and I mean, I'm sure that all of you know this, but once you start recognizing inequity, you're like, oh my God, how can everybody not see this? So I have really focused on finding more women performers, connecting with the LGBTQ community, finding performers with disabilities. This is even like a tricky thing because a lot of times the venues are not accessible, but trying to figure out how we address that and figure out, what way I can be a part of that. Trying to find people of color, have them on my shows, support their shows. Anyway, so this is what Improbable Comedy has sort of highlighted. We still book lots of different types of people, but that is definitely where we're leaning in. And that's kind of where things are. Of course, in the pandemic, we did Zoom shows, and then now we're not in the, now we're like not doing Zoom shows, and we're back in person, and all the wonderful challenges of and the amazingness of being in person. I would say you need a little bit of inspiration and you need a ton of perspiration. It is like so much work to make the bliss happen. Still worth every minute. And I agree about like do little things all the time. But even though I called it improbable, now I look at it and I'm like, oh, it was improbable to do that first show. And now it's just like, I am just gonna make this happen. It is the most like, I'm gonna just have to make it my own luck. So yeah, that's my journey. That's my story. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for sharing. And you know what? It's really funny because we see ourselves in the mirror, and that's kind of like two-dimensional. We don't see ourselves like other people see us. And sometimes it takes actually somebody outside our circle say, oh my God, you'll be so awesome doing this. You'll be so great. Have you thought about it? So also for the participants, the panelists, think about if that has happened to you, because it'd be great if you share that, or if you've seen that on somebody else and you've taken the time to say, oh my God, you would be an amazing teacher or whatever else, because sometimes somebody else sees it and we do not. Thanks for sharing that. And I don't know, I might ask you, Kim, to do some improv here. Kind of to tease your show. Thank you so much for sharing that. Neha, now is your turn. Tell us about Your Bliss.
Thank you so much, Lorna, and so lovely to follow you, Kim, and everybody who has come before during this panel and across generations. So thank you. So again, my name is Neha. It means love, the most difficult and beautiful meaning of my name to embody in my creative life, which is the whole of my life. So for me, I love the title, and it's my very first thought of, when I reflected on following your bliss was that for me, it's not so much following as it is reclaiming. My whole creative life in this season of life is about reclaiming and remembering what has been dismembered within me and in our world. So that's the space physically and spiritually and creatively that I'm embodying. So I grew up in Delhi, as Lorna, you so kindly read out in my bio, and Lisa, thank you for sharing as well. I studied physics and economics in a house full of doctors and engineers, and creativity was just in very air that I breathed. So art wasn't something that you go out to the museum to only experience periodically. I feel our culture is very creative. My home was very creative. And at the same time, as Picasso said that we are all born artists, our challenge is how to stay artists as we grow older. So for me, I feel we live in a reductionist world, which tells you can be either this or that. You can either have this one side of you, your first passion, second passion, third passion, but nobody asked that to Leonardo da Vinci and so many celebrated, if I may say, older white men, that you can only be one thing. And I feel the reductionism is in the world, and it is also internalized. So for me, as somebody who studied physics and became an economist, energy economist in my very first professional job, and who, through a lot of breakdowns and breakthroughs in life came to embody my creative life, I realized that for the last 2 decades of my professional life, I was always having to do this gymnastics that in this space, I'm a poet. In this space, I'm an artist. In this space, I'm a social entrepreneur. So even before the world was reducing me, but I was also self-editing, that in this bio, I'll cut out the poet. In this bio, I'll cut out that I have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa, that I have been in Forbes magazine, or I've been in Nat Geo magazine. So the stage I am in right now, I launched my multidisciplinary creative studio at the peak of the pandemic last year. And the very purpose of my studio is to build the bridges between private, collective, and planetary healing, because I, was so burned out from my global development, climate champion life, which gradually overtook all parts of me, and the artist and the poet were sitting in the corner. And it is not a coincidence that there are so many burnt out human beings in a burning planet. Literally, our planet is burning because so many, I feel our systems disconnect the connection due to our Mother Earth. Our healing is deeply connected. So at this stage of life, in this season, for me, following my bliss means reclaiming loudly, proudly my wholeness. I'm an artist, I'm a poet, I'm a climate justice advocate. I do work to make solar industry much more inclusive. And in case some of you don't know, solar industry in America is 88% led by white men. So, and this is also the inequality is also, of course, globally, it is very male dominated. So, so am I this part or that part? I'm all of them, because our planet needs creative embodiment, and following my bliss is to live my truth and inspire so many other human beings, and especially people of color, women of color, first and last generation immigrants, multi-generation immigrants in a country of immigrants, which only labels some as, fresh off the boat, that we do not have to reduce ourselves. We can be in our wholeness and all our magnificence. So thank you for joining me in your magnificence.
Thank you, Neha, for sharing not only your experience, but your energy and your spirit. And it's really interesting that you mentioned you opened your studio during the pandemic. A lot of people made a lot of changes and life-changing decisions during the pandemic. And that is risky to have done so at that time. Así que I hope you're doing wonderful and really enjoying that space.
My studio is my dining table. It's lovely. It feeds my soul and my stomach.
Hey, but you know what? You call it your studio. So that is actually fantastic. Once you're there, it is your studio. This is my government office right here. You know, it's part of what the pandemic brought us and how we have all adapted and gotten very creative. So thank you for sharing that. Joel, you are up next. I can't wait to hear what you're doing these days, Joel.
Okay, Lorna, thank you very much.
There you are.
I'm so impressed with everyone else that I'm almost not ready to talk about myself here. First of all, you're all very inspiring. I suppose I fit the pattern that was just described, an older white male. But since I'm not in charge of anything, it's probably just as well that I just describe what it's been like. And I'm probably also the one closest to the end of this journey toward bliss. Because of my age, I'll be 82 in January.
You're young. You're young.
Well, young enough, right there. So what I'd like to say, however, is that I have never really felt a need to search for a blissful situation. I followed events and opportunities, much like some of you have done, and I jumped on them when I had a chance. I did have this desire to become an anthropologist. When I went to college, I was impressed with anthropology in all its manifestations as a human science, with an emphasis on the word human. It wasn't biology only, it wasn't psychology only, it wasn't sociology only. It was all these things, plus the idea of communities, families, cultures, societies, and if I can put it that way, the evolution of societies. So that's what got me interested, and I wanted to go and do things in places where I felt I could learn about those things and become more human. Growing up in the US, as some people have pointed out, may tend to specialize people. They go to schools, they go to colleges, then they become professionals, if they can, if they have the wherewithal and the background, and then they lead a professional life following along a pattern of sorts. Well, we all follow patterns. And the question is, what pattern to follow? And is there a way to make that pattern meaningful to the individual and to the groups that they're in? So I took a chance when I finished college and went off on a Fulbright to England to study anthropology, never having been to England, never having actually done graduate work of any sort. And I spent a year or two on the Fulbright there learning how the British people live, but actually being tested to see if I could qualify to become a professional anthropologist. Then at the end of 2 years, I left the British Isles, by which time, I'd gotten used to their lifestyle, came back to the States and traveled all over the country on a bus, the good old fashioned Greyhound tour.
Oh, wow.
With a ticket that took me anywhere I wanted to go, and visited people, visited places, tried to sort of reassert myself. What am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? And what am I learning by moving around? I'd been raised, as I mentioned in the bio, by a family that moved around a lot. So I'd been exposed to 7 different public schools in my childhood. I never had one place, although I graduated from Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, the old Blair, not the new Blair. I was only there a couple of years. So I never got situated. I never got embedded in a community. And when I wanted to do anthropology, I thought I need to go to some community in the third world and learn what their community life is like, what their family life is like, what their symbols are, what their values are, and somehow write about it and become part of it. And that's what I did when I got a fellowship to go to North Africa and Tunisia for 18 months to do my field work in preparation for a PhD. Now the PhD was a remote part. You know, you'll get there eventually, but now you have the experience. So I jumped in a Land Rover, crossed the Channel, went through France, down through Spain, and across all of North Africa, from Morocco through Algeria to Tunisia, sort of learning few things along the way, practicing my Arabic, trying to get used to what was gonna come. Showed up in Tunis, Tunisia, with a contact at the University of Tunis. Went there, talked to this individual, and he said, "Oh, I know someone who can find a village for you that he came from." Introduced me to this other scholar, who then drove down with me in my Land Rover to a village in the central part of Tunisia, which happened to be his home village. He was trusting enough to place me there and to get his family to encourage me to stay there, which I did for almost 18 months, learning their way of life, their culture, their idioms, their food, and basically how their family life operated in a way very different from what I experienced growing up and what I thought I'd learned in college. And then my job was to write about it. Well, of course, I'd been taking notes all the time. And what anthropologists do, if I may digress, is they observe. They observe what people are doing. They ask the people, "What are you doing?" And if they have enough capacity in the language, they get an answer. And then they say, "Why are you doing it?" And that's the hard question. Why do you do this way, whereas other people in the world do something in a different way? What makes you, in effect, tick? And that basically is what anthropologists do in a variety of circumstances and situations. And what I did learn, among other things, is that everybody has a history. Every human being, every family, every village, every culture, every society has history embedded in it. And we can't go and find a culture or society which is without a history. So you have to learn a little bit about their historical background to understand what they're doing today. As one of the world's great anthropologists said, if you don't learn something new, then anthropology is nothing but Oriental history. That was from a white man's point of view. But I was learning it in a North African society, which had mixed populations. And it turned out that the village I went to my astonishment, although they spoke the Arabic language, a dialect, and they had many Arab customs, and they were Muslims, they were actually of Berber origin. And they had many customs remaining from their history as Berbers, although they now identified as Arabic speakers in an Arab country. And so I learned that these cultures pile on top of each other, and people are the sum of these things. And very often they recognize that. And it's not as if I'm pointing it out to them, they're pointing it out to me. So I went back to Britain, wrote my doctoral dissertation very slowly. And while I was living in Cheshire, near the city of Manchester, where I was doing my doctoral degree, I happened to bump into a young woman who was an au pair at one of the big houses out there, a wealthy area. And we got acquainted. You know, in Britain, pubs are very cozy places. And we started getting to know each other, even though we had language barriers. And Maya, my first and only wife, is the person I met in Northern England. And then we got to know each other better. There's a lot of stories of escapades, but I won't go there. And then eventually, after I moved back to the States and started as a assistant professor of anthropology, Maya came over, and a year later we married. That was the light of my life at that time. It didn't matter what my profession was. It didn't matter what my studies were, what the university was. She and I got together, and she became, in essence, my bliss starting at that point. And we've been married now, just had our 54th anniversary. So yeah, we're old, but yeah, it's been good. So as we go along, we find that our lives form patterns, and our lives formed a pattern which we would alternate between working in the United States to make a living and then getting a grant to go overseas, or a fellowship, or some kind of consultantship. And we would go to places like Morocco, which was the second place I went. And then spent almost 2 years there and in Tunisia with my wife and our first child. That was a different experience. It turns out that in Morocco, there are real Berbers. They are actually Berber speaking. They have Berber language, Berber culture. And they share some things with the other North Africans, but they are very distinct. And they turn out to be the actual majority of the country of Morocco, which calls itself an Arab country, which is something that was another interesting thing I learned. And many of these people who are Berber culture, Berber speakers, are Black people. Many of them are tan-colored people, white people. They are a mixture of races, but they have one culture in common. And that's something I learned from the Atlas Mountain people of Morocco that I hadn't ever seen before. And also in the Saharan desert from the oases, similar situations. So we bounced back to the States. And finally, somebody said to me, you've got to really get a profession other than anthropology. You can't make much of a living. Why don't you go into public health? You've been in all these places. You've had all these infectious diseases. You've seen epidemics. Try it out. So I did. I got a fellowship from the Rockefeller Foundation at the University of North Carolina and did a Master of Science in Public Health there based on the issues of disease transmission and sanitation. Something out of my ordinary experience, something new for me, something a lot more technological and scientific than I was used to. However, I managed to learn it and then get a job doing that sort of thing back in this case, in Morocco, once again, and eventually in Sudan, both of which were countries which had very poor sanitation and lots of diseases. Sudan, which came a little later in the picture, was probably the most remote situation. I was in the south of Sudan, right next to what is now called South Sudan, a new country in turmoil. And I was studying mainly nomadic people there, some of whom were African, some of whom were Arab, and their livestock were mainly cattle. These were cattle nomads. And rather than riding on camels, the way you think of nomads in parts of Africa doing, like the Sahara, they rode on oxen. That was their means of conveyance when they were traveling with their flocks and with their herds of cattle back and forth to the seasonal pastures. And I went with them. And I can tell you, it was not easy on my back, but I had a Land Rover type of vehicle, and I would trail along and see how they lived. And they would tell me how they lived and the problems that they faced. And it was a much more Spartan existence, but a very different culture. After Sudan, came back to the States and finally decided with my wife that we needed to settle down. We decided to settle in Silver Spring near my parents' home because I could get a job here and I could be near my family, along with my wife and now two children. And so we have spent since the 1980s on and off living in Silver Spring, going on 42 years now. And that included travel abroad and travel back. And my life has turned out to be one of travel until COVID. And as somebody mentioned earlier, COVID certainly changed everything like that. The year before COVID, I went back to Morocco and spent a month and a half there, visiting some of the places I had worked before. I was doing this at the age of nearly 80, and it was a different experience by this age. But I did enjoy it, although all the things that can happen to you on a relatively short trip happened. You know, having your wallet stolen, being stung by, shall we say, rather large hornets, stomach upsets, and so forth, breakdowns. Finally, coming back, I walked right back into the COVID crisis. And here we are almost 2 years later, and I practically haven't left home. What I've done is work in my local community, and I've made a way of volunteering to help the people I live near and live with succeed in keeping our community together, learning that community can be anywhere, even right here in Silver Spring.
Silver Spring.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Joel. First and foremost, imagine how proud the folks that live in Silver Spring should be. You've been pretty much around the globe studying different communities, and now you've settled in our neck of the woods. So thank you for bringing that to Silver Spring. And second, I wanted to comment, I've never heard of a gentleman say that his bliss, it's actually his wife. So it's the first time I hear that. Thank you for sharing that as well. And I mean, thank you all. You've been incredible sharing your stories and your bliss. So let's get started with a little bit of a Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand or just participate and talk about it and so forth. Let's just flow, okay? So for most of you, did you know your whole life that what you're doing today is what you've always wanted to do? I mean, we've already heard on the stories that there have been changes, evolutions, moments of bliss where you decided to do something else, or somebody said to you, oh my God, you can be a comedian. But did you know all your life that you would be doing what you're doing today?
No.
Anybody can answer that. Bola?
So that's a good question. I don't think I knew.
Fix your audio. Come again closer, like your audio.
Is it better?
Better.
Okay. Let me get closer. Yeah, I don't think I knew the term consulting growing up, but I've always known that I enjoy helping people solve problems. I really just enjoy, being a part of the solution, whatever that meant. But I think as I started my career, so I had a computer science degree as an undergrad, and working within corporations, I was an internal consultant working with, the IT side of the organization as well as the business side, using technology to leverage solutions. However, I think as time went by, I refined my focus. So at the heart of what I do continues to be solving interesting problems by working with people. But just the target became more narrow and focused. And for me, it's always about the value add. I want to be in a space where the value that I'm bringing to the table goes a much longer way, is of great impact. So I really just enjoy the space that I'm in right now, working with small minority-owned, medium-sized businesses to really think through problems, but also to partner with them. So I think it's just sort of become much more focused as I've grown older, even though I've always enjoyed the space that I'm in.
How about you, Phillippa? You were a lawyer by training. Did you always know that at some point you were going to say goodbye to all of this? There's something else I want to pursue.
No, not at all. And in fact, this question reminds me of a talk that I heard on YouTube. It was Steve Jobs giving a commencement address to the class of, maybe it was like 2005 at Stanford. And he talks about like how you can't really see how the dots connect going forward, but you can only see how they connect when you look back. And so, yeah, I don't know how anybody could, I mean, I don't know, I guess maybe in the olden days when people like went to school and they learned a job, a vocation, and they went into that job and worked that job for the next 40 years, you know, it's just different now. Like there's so many more, like just everything's just, the potential is so much greater for it, just inventing yourself and inventing your career that there's just no way I could have predicted that I'd end up here. But that said, you know, I was thinking about Steve Jobs saying about the dots and how you couldn't see how they connect going forward. But one thing that I've done a lot, and I think that my corollary to his rule is that you just have to throw out a lot of dots. So I'm constantly throwing out lots of dots and trying to meet people or have experiences without having a plan or an expectation, but doing it out of curiosity and just interest. And then eventually all those dots, like a lot of those dots actually did connect up, but I couldn't have predicted how. So that's why I just find it so interesting when people want to like have some kind of transactional interaction with me where they're like, I can do something for you and you can do something for me. I'm like, I don't know, can you really? Like, I just think that you have to put it all out there and again, just keep following the path that makes like the most sense to your gut and to your, to your heart.
The gut, the heart, that makes sense, and also opportunity. Sometimes they're around us and we don't see them. Neha, how about you? When did you come to the realization that what you added to physics, it's what you wanted to do?
So for me, it's partly my privilege and partly the way I grew up. I feel I have always been a creature of passion, and it's more a matter of different seasons of life where the color and the texture of those passions has changed for me. So after I moved to America that was in early 2000s, when I was working economist.
Your video.
I remember when I first moved here, I used to wear gray clothes and suit, those suit pants. I do not have any suit pant in my closet anymore, but I was trying to fit in so much, and my friends who knew me, they said, who is this person? And it took, when they say coming of age, I feel coming of age is not just, when you are younger or in your teenage, we are constantly coming of age. So for my coming of age as a younger immigrant woman was, why am I trying to fit in when I'm meant to stand out? And I feel it's a constant coming of age for me, and hence this flower every single day in different color. But I just feel that life whispers to us. Sometimes it knocks and sometimes it bangs. In the latest episode of my Following My Bliss, it came through some health crisis. You mentioned Portugal. Actually, I was in Portugal in 2018, and I was there for a meeting for Global Sustainable Energy for All Forum, and I had to be rushed to an ER. Great service, healthcare is good, assured, if anybody is planning to visit Portugal. But, and that led to, it turned out I had kidney stones, and it led to some health issues, and I got treated, came back home, but I paused. What is life trying to tell me? And life was trying to tell me that I was burning myself out while trying to save a burning world as a climate justice advocate. And there's this line by Saint Edna that my candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night, but look, it gives such a lovely light. So that was really my unfolding of this present chapter of my bliss, that I have to stop doing that. I cannot burn myself out while trying to save a burning planet. two are deeply tied together. There is no healing of the world without healing myself. So it's just listening to live speaking in foreign languages, and one can choose to either dismiss it and say, okay, let me try to understand this language.
I love how you say this present chapter, because you're young, we're all young, and there might be a next chapter. We don't know what that is. So thank you, Neha, for that. The other thing is that you mentioned the pantsuits, the pantsuits that you get rid of in order to become who you are today. Let me tell you something, and I'm going to confess here. I've been doing TV broadcasting for over 30 years. And is that square? It used to be the shoulder pads, long sleeve suits. That news reporter persona, that person that I still transform into 9 to 5, I'm starting to despise that. I want to burn them all. All my dresses that made that persona, because I've transitioned to this, the person that wears the curly hair naturally, doesn't blow dry to be in front of a camera. So I hope to follow your bliss and get rid of my dresses, just like you got rid of your pantsuits. Jason, aha moment, turning point. When you mentioned a little bit at the beginning that you had that one moment, that connection with your God, the universe, nature, the outdoors, the hikes, the woods. What was your aha moment to decide to go back to school in your 30s?
Well, I think this is a great transition, because I think what I've heard from listening to a lot of you is there was something that you had to like release or give up, or some sort of obstacle. And I think for a lot of us, it's either fear. For me, it was ego, or allowing yourself to shine brightly and not making yourself smaller. I think all of us have these things.
You froze a little bit here, Jason.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not sure where I left off, but I was just saying that from what I've heard from a lot of you, there was something you had to either overcome or give up. And for me, it really was my ego. And I think that somehow, I don't know if I raised myself or culture, but I was very much focused on service to humanity all my life, but it was from an egotistical standpoint. How could I help the most? How could I do the most, serve the most people? And I think that prevented me from reaching my bliss, because it was this ego in my head of I'm smart enough, I'm big enough, I should be working on a big project. And then finally, when the world beat me down, because I wasn't following my bliss, I wasn't aligned with God or my soul's purpose, then I allowed myself permission to focus on what made me joyful and happy. And I think the heart of God is joy and love, but really joy. And I feel that like the moment you're aligned with that soul's purpose, this aha moment kind of came about for me, where I said, I'm going to let that ego go. And that's the old me. I'm going to focus on my heart and what I want to do. And I didn't go into it with an act of service. It was a very selfish thing for me. What do I want to do to be happy? And I honestly asked God for permission. Can I be selfish right now and focus on my new career? And then the interesting part of that is that it turned into an act of service. It turned into following my passion for education, my passion for connecting people to the environment, connecting people to nature. And so it was sort of going through the needle, or going through a very dark tunnel and coming out the other side. But for me, I had to give up my ego. And I'm sure that all of you have these stories where you have to give something up to find your true calling or your true self. And I'll just quickly end it. It doesn't have to be career. It sounds like for all of us, it's been career. It doesn't have to be career. Sometimes we're not privileged enough to have that partner that can work full time when we go back to school or travel. So it could just be a hobby, or it could be volunteer or some sort of service. So it's been an interesting journey.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Indeed, sometimes going through the woods, the darkness and the storm, it's what brings about that commitment to let the ego, put it aside, and find what you can serve best. For those of you participating as an audience, feel free to utilize the chat if you have any questions for any of the panelists. It'd be great to share some of your questions as well. Now, about traditional education, Jason, you went back to school in your 30s in order to study. Did any of you do something similar? Go back and get, learn what you needed to do to follow your bliss? Raise your hands. It's okay. Oh, there's a cat. Bola?
Yeah, so I mentioned I have a computer science degree as an undergrad, and I really just went into it because I knew computers were
Get a little closer to the mic again.
because I knew computers were going to be a thing. But as I graduated, I really knew that my heart was in business. So after having two children, 2 and 3, I went to business school, once again, with the hopes of getting into consulting for small businesses, and really picking up the skills, the technical knowledge for how to support the growth and scaling of small businesses. And then, of course, after graduating, I went to work for a traditional consulting firm. However, some years later, I found my way back to really what I wanted to do all along, which is to work with small and growing businesses. So it all sort of connected after getting my degree.
Anybody else wanted to answer that?
I can just very quickly share. I have taken more courses in last 1.5 years of pandemic than last 20 years. So it has been about so much learning, and I've really enjoyed, particularly, I've worked with creative coaches on how to take something which is sacred to me and how to make that livelihood, and how to address my own issues about money, capitalism, oppression, and such. Just a few things. And I'm actually, I recently became part of this program called Design Science Studio, which is a collaboration between Buckminster Fuller Institute, who was an American visionary, and an organization called Habit Ritual, which brings together regenerative artists from around the world. So still on the path of learning, and it has meant so much to me to actively be learning again. So I love this question. Thank you.
Now, if you did not follow traditional education to follow your bliss, how did you learn to do what you're currently doing? For instance, Kim, I'd love to know, how do you do, and how do you learn, and how do you do improv comedy? How do you make people laugh? It's not easy to do that, aside from the fact that you have the talent.
I will say, I always say I'm just the producer. I mean, it's very fun to stand up in front of, and you could be funny kind of for a minute or 3, and then it is a lot of fun to hold the microphone in front of the audience. But the performers that we book, and certainly the performers who are very funny in this culture and many other cultures, they work very hard. They work on their writing, they write, they edit, they perform, they record themselves, they watch themselves, they write, they edit, they're really working on their craft. And the piece that I feel I bring to that is that there's no place for people to enjoy that if there's not a producer to make it happen. And so all of those pieces that go into that, the size of the venue, how comfortable people are, what their expectations are when they walk in the room, are they hungry? Somebody once said to me, like, no one wants to laugh at a joke while they're chewing ravioli. Like thinking about what the experience is of people to be sitting and ready to let themselves really truly laugh, who's on stage. Anyway, all of those pieces, that is really where I put my talents. I will say, like Neha, it was important to me as a woman to do this as a small business and not as a nonprofit. People often say, oh, you could do this as a nonprofit. And I'm like, nobody says that to men. Nobody says go donate your talents to. So it was important to me to make it work, to make the numbers work. I also have a day job and I have a supportive spouse. It is true, much like Phillippa said, it does make a difference. but I really work hard at learning the pieces that make those things work. I had to learn a lot about marketing. I had to learn a lot about accounting. I mean, there's like things, there are many pieces of running a business that when you can do them well, they can really support your work. I just wanted to also just say 2 seconds about when you're talking about a second passion, one that I've discovered in myself as I've done this more and more, is how interested I am in place, in actually Silver Spring, which of course we've lived here for almost 20 years, my husband and kids and I. And I might think my kids, you know, they think they're from here, even though I think we're from so many places that we've lived. But I really feel excited now to like, how can comedy, how can improbable comedy, how can the arts like dig in and make more of Silver Spring and bring out more of the greatness of like the people already here. I've just really become excited about that. And it's not anything that I had when I was growing up. I wasn't interested really in civic life that much, you know, it's just I voted and I thought that was kind of good. But so that's been something that I've kind of discovered as another piece of what's interesting to me about this, partnering with other businesses, partnering with organizations like SSTCI, to mutually make each other stronger. That's something that I've really been excited about.
Let's talk a little bit now about support and also the role that perhaps mentors took while you were evolving into what you are and where you are today. Phillippa did mention, you know, that financial support that she had from her partner allowed her to do transitions. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's moral, you know, the pat on the back, sometimes it's somebody pushing you and just believe it in you. So do you want to share, all of you, what kind of supports you have had and any mentors perhaps?
I'd like to kick off that question. And I will say I'm not actually married to that person anymore. So I've been kind of had to figure it out after we split up. But it was very nice to have that initial support, obviously, because I don't think I could have made that transition without it. But, you know, in terms of mentors, that's actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because, you know, there's that saying about like, you know, you are the sum of the 5 people who you spend the most time with. And I've always, you know, you kind of know in our gut that that's true, but I mean, I realize how true that actually is. And so, you know, I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is like just completely, not just surround myself with people who just will push me, but also who are just smarter than I am, who know things that I don't know. And, you know, that's part of the problem. I mean, this is a whole other conversation about, you know, our political polarization, but like we're so often in our little echo chambers, and we are comfortable hanging out with people that we can have sort of like-minded conversations with. I'm not talking about politically, but just in life. Like we just get into this sort of little rut of like, you see the same people and you kind of start having the same conversations. And so I'm very conscious of trying to have different kinds of conversations with people who have nothing to do with anything that I'm working on right now, because I really am interested in pulling in information from so many different sources in order to, going back to something Bola said, was to solve problems. Because essentially at the end of the day, like even what you're talking about, Kim, and all of us, like we're just kind of trying to solve little problems all day long, how to do things, how to make things work. And so I think that is sort of one of my greatest skills, is like I've learned how to solve a lot of problems. And so anyway, so I appreciate you saying that too, Bola, is learning. And one thing about learning how to solve problems is like you have to be able to look at things from different perspectives with different information. And so again, it just keeps going back to always surrounding yourself with people who can give you different perspectives and give you different information.
Anybody else wants to chime in on that one?
Well, I'd like,
Joe?
if I may, what I hear all of you saying, and it really touches me, is that we're all struggling in some way with the same kinds of issues, even though we were in very different fields and very different lifestyles and so forth. What impressed me is that none of us really needs to have just a professional type of career. There is such a thing, and I've learned it the hard way, as a moral career, meaning the career of your life as opposed to of your specialty. Secondly, what a few people have mentioned is when they had difficult times, is that there are such things as moral wounds. We all can be wounded physically. We can have illnesses, we can have accidents, we can have violence committed against us, but we also go through moral pain. And to me, I've learned in the space of these, 80 years, as they say, that I've gone through a lot of moral anguish, and I've learned to develop myself in a moral sense through my own mistakes very often and learn from them. But I've had extraordinary mentors. I've had the academic type mentor. I've had the parental mentor. I have a spousal mentor in my wife. I can be mentored by people younger than myself very easily, and I've learned to do that now. They have a lot more to give in some ways than older people do. And so I'm drawing upon that for my community work. I should mention that one of the groups I joined, interestingly enough, my wife and I have joined, is called the Silver Spring Village. It's one of these community villages that have been founded in the United States where people don't necessarily live in the same place, but they live in a region or a county or a city, and they share many activities and supports with one another. And they are people we've never met before in many cases. Lisa mentioned one of them, Tom Diaz, who's going to give a talk soon, who's a member of the Silver Spring Village. And I have a walking partner who takes me on 2-mile walks almost every day. And he happens to be both a physical neighbor and a Silver Spring Village partner. He is my mentor. Finally, I think it's worth mentioning that all of us can benefit from growing this way. And I'm feeling that even at my age, I still have space to grow. One of the things I learned about in the last few years is that when a damaging thing happens to a community, it really affects people to their core. And some of the people can pull themselves together and make the best of it. The example I would give is a little group that I belong to called the Talbot Avenue Bridge Community. Talbot Bridge was over the railway between two segregated neighborhoods, one of which I live in or near, and the other of which on the other side of the tracks was all white. And believe it or not, I found out I grew up in that other neighborhood, not knowing that it was all white. And I moved to the Black and integrated neighborhood, the first in Montgomery County, because when my wife and I came back from Africa, we didn't want to live in a lily white situation. We wanted to be with people of all backgrounds. And so we moved here. It's the greater Littonsville area. And when the Purple Line came along and decided to take down the 100-year-old railway bridge over the CSX tracks, used to be the B&O, people reacted. And now we formed this committee to preserve the old parts of the bridge and to remember that bridge and pass it on to our children and all the children of the communities. And we formed an alliance among ourselves to do just that. Not political, not angry, just to help remember our shared history with all its imperfections. And I think that is something that can be done in groups larger than the individual or family. And I would like to emphasize it's important to reach out in that way. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Joel, with us this evening. I have another question. What surprises you the most about where you are today? It's like, wow, I did it. I'm doing it. I can't believe it. What surprises you the most?
I'll tell you one thing that surprises me, or surprises everyone who knows me. I was like a very geeky kid. But when I tell people that I produce comedy shows, immediately I get this little bit of shine, and people are like, "Oh, that's so interesting. Tell me about that." And I find that it's like suddenly I have a part of me that's cool. And I just feel like I never had that side of me. So it's it's like fun to do a thing that people think is neat and talk to people about it. I have to give this one out loud shout out to our own shows. And I just want to say it on the video because I think people who see this afterwards won't see the chat. So we have 2 great shows coming up, and I just want, if you all want to check out improbablecomedy.com, we have an all-immigrant lineup at Busboys Tacoma on December 16th. We do that show every month, and it is really fun. It's called Comedy is a Second Language. So that is one show that's coming up. And then on January 1st, we have our New Year's Day comedy show, and we have a great lineup also. So please, if you're seeing this afterwards, but it's not yet, then please check it out and tell your friends and come on out. It's a lot of fun to laugh together. So thank you for letting me plug that, Lisa.
Anybody else on that one? What surprises you the most about where you are today?
I'll just quickly share. I definitely relate to that, Kim, especially in DC region where everyone's in politics or lawyers, right? And so you go to a party and they're like, oh, I work here. And then, but the moment you say something new, like horticulture, a few comedy, it's like, oh, wow, and they want to talk to you. So it does feel good. But I will say the one thing that surprises me that I never thought, honestly, I'd have, because I hadn't experienced it until recently, was peace. I'm really at peace in my life. Just finding this, for me, a career where I'm just happy and I feel like I'm contributing to society in a way that's sincere and there's no ego involved and it's just pure love. I'm just at peace, and I never thought I'd be at peace. I always struggled emotionally most of my life with just a lot of issues, and so now I'm happy. So
I would agree with that, Jason. I think for the longest time, especially in consulting, it's such a it could be high intense environment, especially when you're in a traditional consulting space. You work so long, and to be honest, I mentioned I went to business school when my children were 2 and 3, and I got out of the traditional consulting space and started my own business when my oldest was going into high school. So he was about 13 or 14. So for about 10 years, I just look back and, no offense to those who are in the corporate environment, but I really almost regret that time. To your point, Jason, it kind of just felt like I was running in this rat race that really was not rewarding. I felt like I took a lot of time away from my family, and it's almost like a blur now. And I woke up every day just feeling this sense of anxiety and just really feeling unfulfilled. So what's surprising is waking up every day, pursuing your own dreams and realizing, there's, for me personally with my own business, there's no guaranteed paycheck unless I get up and, go pursue, clients and do the work that I want to do. And even though I've had to take a huge pay cut, and even just the certainty around, where the next paycheck is going to come from is not there, but I've just never been so at peace. I think there's really a thing that you get as a reward when you're willing to trust God. I love the point that you made, Jason, earlier about love. When you're doing something that is a part of your calling, and you're working and where you feel your passion is, and you just leave the rest. They say, let go and let God. I don't want to get too spiritual here, but the peace that comes with that is really just second to none. And I wake up every day feeling as if, people ask me, could you ever go back to corporate America? And I can't really see it. There's so much of you that you sacrifice, and it's such a high price to pay when you're not walking in your mission. And I think when you tap into that, just the sense of peace, I can't, help but go back to that word. It's so tremendous. It's so amazing. And it's truly surprising. So, yeah.
Can I just quickly add, and actually taking that thread from Bola and Jason, the spiritual ecology of creative life for me, the biggest surprise has been, I come from Hindu tradition, and we believe in reincarnation, which is, of course, after death. But my biggest surprise is that we can reincarnate in this life. We are not just defined by one identity of who we have been. We can reimagine ourselves and we can reimagine our world, which to me is deeply spiritual, because we are living through times of such deep reckonings, ecological reckonings, racial reckonings, so much grief because of, you know, the health situation in the world. So yeah, and that has been the most delightful surprise in parallel with so much grief in the world. And my wish is just that more of us, if we feel called to, maybe reincarnate our burning world, you know, and ourselves with it.
You talked about peace for the most part, the three of you, and also you finished your answer, Jason, with "I'm happy." I'd like to ask all of you very quickly, because we still have a bunch of other questions. What makes you happy and what motivates you? Who wants to start?
I'd like to start.
Okay, there we go.
I'm trying to stay away. I'm striving to not focus on being happy. Kind of going back to what you were, this whole conversation, it's just about purpose. When I feel a sense of purpose, I feel that sense of peace. So I don't describe it as happy. I feel that I am living the exact, like I'm living a life in which I'm at the highest and best use of the skills that I have, like the skills that I have, or you know, like when I was still practicing law, that was not the highest and best use of me. And so that was not the right purpose for me. And so I don't know. I'm still kind of formulating this thought, because I've been thinking about this a lot. Like I'm not about trying to be less happy and more purposeful with my life.
Who wants to answer that? What makes you happy or motivates you? Bola?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, just to continue the trend of peace, you know, what makes me happy is really just manifesting my vision, my potential. I don't know how else to put it, but I think every day when you go along the journey of trusting, you know, that everything will fall into place. I love what you said, Neha, you know, just reincarnating yourself, but a better version of yourself, and being able to get up every day. And yes, obviously, you know, what I do is consult with small businesses, and at surface, it seems really just, you know, what everybody else is doing. It's not a big deal, but I think when it taps into your true calling, you know, that truly is a wealth of happiness when you feel as if it matters in the greater scheme, not only for the, you know, folks that you're working with, but just even for yourself, being able to manifest a vision that you've seen, and bringing it into reality. But also for my children, I have 3 brown children, 2 girls, 1 boy, and in this space that we live in, you know, a lot of times there's so many things that's denied to them, just even in the space of manifestation. You know, there's so much that's told to them that, you know, a caricature or narrative that's been told that, you know, this is where you fit and that's all that it is. But being able to get up every day and, you know, I call it calling bluff. You know, there's some things that society tells you, but even things that your mind tells you, but you sort of call bluff on it and you push beyond that, and being able to see it manifest is truly just a space of happiness for me. And I love being able to not only live that out, but also, you know, just be an example for my children. I think it's important for children to see, you know, we tell them, we try to train them, but the best way to teach them is to truly become that example for them. So for them to see that, you know, my mom can do this and she's not any special, surely I can do this. And to me, it just brings such peace once again, but tremendous happiness, because I think it's the greatest, you know, teaching tool that I can give to them.
I empathize with that very much. And I can tell you, it's even more fun with grandchildren. Because then you're not up against it. You don't have to make the kind of decisions that may affect their lives right away, but you have to be there for them and with them, and you can enjoy them. And I can add also that I don't really think it's a racial thing to have that sense of generations. That I think is a human thing, and we can all share that. Your children, my children, we are all we're all connected. And I as much as I've worked in the civil rights area as a volunteer and done many things that my social worker mother said, that's what you should do. I'm not an activist in that sense. I tend to be, I want to be part of the group. I want to go with the flow of it. And I think we've made some great strides by going together. And I'd like to see that continue. I didn't think we'd get to this point, actually, where we could actually get beyond mere legal desegregation, but we're getting there. And I'm hopeful about it.
Joel, may I ask, how many grandchildren do you have?
Only 5 biological ones, but
Congratulations.
lots of others that we interact with the families in the community and so forth. So we feel blessed by all that as well. And you know what? We didn't seek it. They just came along.
Kim, I think you wanted to talk. Yes.
I just loved that expression, Bola, and I'm going to super steal that calling bluff. I think that is just such a good way to talk about things that we might have believed our whole lives, or even things we discovered that we believe, and just a way to say, you know, maybe that's not true. I would say that something that brings me joy in terms of this, you know, this conversation and having done a lot of shows, it is incredibly satisfying to be at the back of the room and to watch the audience laugh very hard, doubled over, tears coming down. They're like looking at their partner that they came with, like, can you believe this is so funny? And I think, oh, I just helped make that happen. You know, like part of me had this idea that these people might find that comedian very funny and we would do it in this space. And it just, there's a real satisfaction of like a lot of pieces of the world coming together in that moment. So, you know, very often we have people in our audience who have not seen these performers. We had a young trans woman perform the other night, you know, a headline set, like a 45-minute set. But you know, she just had them. And I just know that there were people in that audience who maybe have never even met a trans person, or maybe didn't think they'd ever seen a trans woman. And just to have like all of that experience coming, but in a way that was very accessible and hilarious and irreverent, you know, so it's just very satisfying to be able to find those moments in the work.
So basically seeing other people have a happy moment make you happy.
Yeah. People need to laugh, you know, like desperately they need to laugh. And if you're a person who has a lot of humor in your life, you sometimes forget that some people, they really need to seek it out. They have to like schedule it in their week. I need to make a time when I'm going to be laughing because it's very important to me. It's very important for my mental health.
Let's talk about mistakes. We've all made them. Anybody wants to share what have been your biggest mistakes along the way and how did they help you? Anybody? Nobody's had mistakes.
I can share. So for me, the biggest lesson, and it's an ongoing lesson, is to practice saying no. I feel as a woman, as an immigrant, and all of my layers of identity, like there's so much enculturation to say yes. So I have said in the past a lot of yeses that have, you know, not been wholesome for me or what I was trying to do in the grand scheme of things. So for me, the biggest lesson has been to say no more, and so my deeper yeses can emerge in the world. So I have shed the yes, Neha, through a lot of hard experiences, and what Joel was talking about, moral wounds. There have been, you know, there have been a lot of wounds and healing, you know, because we can heal too. So, thank you.
Anybody else wants to share on mistakes that you've learned something from? No? All right. What are some of the challenges? Because yes, there is bliss and finding that path, walking it, reaching a certain destination. But there are always challenges. What have been some of the challenges that perhaps you have encountered or are encountering today?
The challenges are both yourself, ourself, myself, and other people. And somehow managing to work with other people despite oneself is a challenge. And as someone mentioned, we tend to get in little cocoons and hang out with people who are very much like ourselves, have our same values and so forth. It's working across the boundaries that is the real challenge from what I can see. And I think those are some of the most uplifting things. I don't always seek them out, but they happen. And I find them very meaningful.
Anybody else?
I know this probably goes along with saying no more or something, but there's an element to really just maybe coming late to really valuing yourself and what you bring to the world. Not so that you don't give it away for free, but so that you really appreciate what it is that you have, and wanting other people to also, like even just making the time to come and sit in a real place with real performers for a real hour and a half, not visual, not where you're all zooming and doing something else, like really taking that time because there's value there. And I think maybe taking a long time to get to that. Sorry, that's my dog groaning under the table. Yeah, I would tell my, my 10 years ago when I started Improbable Comedy, I would tell that producer, I would say, you're onto something. Just lean into that a little bit even more.
I really like that. And I can relate in terms of the biggest challenge for me was I like to plan things out and put a neat box around it before I start any adventure or new venture. And I think that's like very human. So I think I held myself back because I couldn't envision how I could manifest my passion and what that would exactly look like. And I tried to put metrics around it and timelines and things. And like, that really was a roadblock, and I was my own roadblock. So I would just say, at some point you have to just let go, and you have to have faith and trust in whatever that looks like for you. And it is a journey. Again, it's not an end goal. It's not a set of metrics. And for everyone, it looks very different. So don't let, what's that saying? Don't let the perfection or so be the, I am horrible at sayings. You all can finish it for me. But that concept, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly formed before you embark on it.
Mm-hmm.
I hear you, Jason. I have been experiencing that with my new venture as an author with a book. I wrote a book in Spanish. It's my native language, and it flowed. It was easy, I just sat there and it happened. Doing it in English language, I took the easier route, which was hire somebody to transcreate. When I took that back and read it, the manuscript in English, it was like, it's lost the feeling. So what it meant was, okay, Lorna, you're going back to the drawing table. You're not paying anybody. You're doing it yourself, and you're not transcreating, translating. You're pretty much rewriting yourself. So it's part of that. I had given myself a deadline. The book in English has to be done by the end of 2021. It's okay if it's 2022. I wanted to ask, how has COVID impacted your work? If I know for you, Kim, of course, not in-person gatherings, large gatherings or anything like that. How has it impacted your work, and how have you kind of worked around it and developed other plans?
Just say very quickly, we transitioned very quickly to doing all Zoom shows, and we did a lot of them in the pandemic. We probably did, I don't know, 2 or 3 a month, and it was great. I actually think transitioning into the pandemic was easier than transitioning out of the pandemic. It's been sort of a stranger journey to come back to being in person. But one thing that I really, I try to always find, something positive and something to learn even from a challenge. And we really saw how many people were able to access our shows on Zoom that were not able to access in-person shows, either because they don't have comedy near them, or like I said, because the venues are not accessible. It just really did open my eyes to how important it is to not always just do like the best and perfect version, but also like, how can you take that best and perfect version of a show in a way that more people can access? So, you know, that really focused our attention on performers with disabilities, people with access issues, people with mobility issues. But yeah, we definitely just we went all Zoom, and now since June or August, we've been all back in person.
Will that continue? Or will we,
Zoom is not
will we
continued
be
only
back in the
because-
soup again?
What's that?
In Zoom? Will we be back in the soup again in Zoom once again? What do you
I
think?
hope not. I hope that people will keep up all the things we need to do to be somewhat in person, even if it's limited capacity. We had to choose one versus the other. There's only one me, and even with a little bit of help, it's impossible to do both things at a high quality. So right now we're only doing our in-person shows. I hope we don't go back to Zoom, but if we do, we'll figure it out. As they say.
Anybody else impacted by COVID while you're living your bliss? As far as obstacles and having to work around it?
I just want to quickly share, I am a first and last generation immigrant. I have not seen my family in 2 years, and it feels like an exile. All my elders are in India, and there has been a lot of death all around me in India and of course here. So there's that challenge of grieving for the world and for private losses, and somehow maybe this is what growing up is. It is for me to behold paradoxes, to inhabit deep grief and joy, because we are mortal beings, life is limited, and the time to follow our bliss is not day after tomorrow.
Exactly. I think we're hitting the 9 o'clock hour. We're supposed to be here till 9 o'clock. And I'd like to just put out this last kind of question for all of the panelists. What would you tell your younger self? And what words of wisdom do you have for the audience that's going to be watching, will be sharing this presentation?
We only have 3 minutes. We only have 2 minutes left to do it. Huh?
Yes, that means it gives you roughly 20 seconds. A lot can be said in 20 seconds. Come on, Joel, you can do it.
All I can say is the totality of this event is the answer to that. The totality of it, not only what one of us said. I picked it up from you all. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. Anybody else?
Follow your heart, not your head. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think for me, every day you get a chance to just start a blank slate, right? And you can create whatever storyline, whatever narrative you want for your life, and you're in control. And I always try to remind myself that you could either be the main character of your own story, or play backup to somebody else's story. So it's always important to follow your bliss and paint the world the colors that you want. So.
I see that Phillippa put on the chat here, advice to my younger self, don't worry about what other people think. And I think that's a really good one as well. Anybody else?
Life is short. Do what you love. The rest will follow.
That's great advice as well. And I'm going to wrap it up, Lisa, with this final thought. As Joel said at the beginning of his presentation, we all have a history. And all of you tonight share some of your history with us and with the audience at large. And thank you. Thank you very much for doing so.
Great.
To you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lorna, for facilitating. It's been a really inspiring evening with all of you. It's really great. I could just go on for hours listening to your stories, and I hope you will join us again for some other SSTCI events. I put them in the chat. We have many opportunities to share your work and your vision and your dreams in various ways. So please keep connected with us, stay connected with us. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.